School. Some people look back to those days with a sense of longing, some even considering their school days the peak of their lives. For others, bad experiences such as bullying, isolation, and anxiety made school dreadful. Disregarding your experience during school, we can all agree on one fact. Homework is bullshit and so is School Days. School Days is one of those animes that somehow we all got to know and left an impression on us for years to come. I am sure that most of us either watched the anime or played the visual novel during our high school years, and probably thought, wow, this anime is great, deep, complex, and an outstanding ending on top of it. Then we all carried on with our lives and kept that impression for many years.
It's no surprise that School Days was a controversial anime, even during its airing period, mainly due to its shocking ending. Even nowadays, you still see discussion online regarding its quality, message, whatever. But it certainly is a piece of anime history worth discussing, be it for good reasons or not. So, was School Days really that bad? Yes. Were we all wrong, or did we miss something? Let's find out. School Days is an anime aired in 2007, based on the visual novel of the same name. The original game was developed by... Wait, hold on, let me check. Zero Burflow in 2005, and both the source material and the adaptation follow the same plotline. Our protagonist is Makoto Ito, a normal student who falls in love with Kotono Hakatsura, a student from the same school who rides the same train by chance. Our protagonist receives the help of Sekai Sayonji, one of his friends, to aid our main character in his love quest for a boyfriend-free girl. However, it is revealed that Sekai is also in love with the protagonist, which ends up creating a love triangle between the three protagonists, which ultimately leads to several crude interactions among the cast.
At first glance, the plot can be deemed as your generic romance anime with a typical harem on top of it. However, having a gimmick doesn't make it good by default. This can certainly make any piece of media stand out from others of the same genre. But, as you will see here, School Days actually stands out for all the wrong reasons. From now on, we will cover several aspects of the anime, such as the plotline and several important events, so needless to say, this review will contain spoilers for the entire thing. This is for two reasons. First, at this point we believe that a lot of people have already watched this shit, or they already know the main twist of what makes it unique. And secondly, the anime itself isn't really worth watching it. Hell, it's even painful to watch at some point.
Less than a minute into the anime, the animation takes a giant leap downhill, where we see a bunch of shadow people surrounding our characters. This wouldn't be much of an issue if there were other interesting stuff to see, but it stands out like a sore thumb, and doesn't get much better as the series progresses. Another pitfall we see the series go into is constantly avoiding the faces of the characters while they're speaking. Although this makes the scenes easier to animate, it just looks lazy, and makes the moments where this happens look stiff. We're off to a great start. I would love to say something about the music, but aside from the track that plays during the final episode, which is lifted straight from the visual novel, there's really nothing memorable. This problem extends to the voice acting as well. While the performances weren't bad, none of them stand out. It may seem like we're skimming over the details of the production, but there's really nothing more to say about it. It's bad, and the time for discussion is better spent talking about the more important flaws of the series.
While looking through different forums and reviews, one common argument that we saw was that the anime was realistic and not your common romance anime, because it represented real problems and behavior. And although we can follow some of the thought process behind it, the anime makes even less sense if we consider that the anime is realistic. Yes, several topics covered throughout the show are sensitive and real. Teenage pregnancy is still an issue nowadays and bullying has never stopped, just to mention a few. The problem isn't that the anime might touch real life issues. The problem is that the way those are represented and conveyed are not accurate, being almost parodies of real life. As mentioned before, it's an important topic in school days and it is portrayed a lot for that reason, especially during the second half of the show. Not that this is based on a hentai, but whatever. However, do you really believe that this guy, a character with no redeemable qualities or decent, remarkable physical appearance, bangs 6 different girls with no big repercussions until the very end of the show? And every girl was okay with that, and no authority, being school staff, parents, whatever, had a word to say about that. What? You didn't bang 6 girls simultaneously during high school? If Persona 5 taught me something, is that your teacher is a good...
The behavior of characters is also inconsistent. They basically acted based on what the script needed to progress the narrative, making the rhythm of the story feel awkward and forced. I think one of the prime examples is Setsuna, who was mostly consistent until they fucked everything up near the end. During the show, you come to understand that she's Sekai's best friend. As the anime progresses, she helps Sekai to achieve her dream, which is dating Makoto. All her actions and behavior go towards that, a supporting friend which will do anything to help her best friend. However, near the end of her arc, she explains that she will be moving to Paris for some reason. So her last wish is that Makoto stays with Sekai, so he can replace her and support Sekai. Something like that. This request makes sense, considering that they are best friends and she looks over her so she can be truly happy. But then, for some reason, it is presented through a flashback that Makoto saved Setsuna from some bullies. And out of nowhere, after presenting this flashback to the viewer, Setsuna falls in love with Makoto. Yeah, the love for him came with lag. And just near the end, and only after showing that flashback to the audience, neuron activation. Don't mind all previous opportunities that she had with him, or showing affection towards him. Affection that was non-existent until a few moments ago. If they really wanted to show that Setsuna had feelings toward Makoto, they should have used any of those previous instances to represent her hidden feelings, or show small hints that ultimately led to this reveal. Even worse, after this she ends up kissing Makoto, and even having sex with him, because she wants some memories. But she still wants him to date Sekai after she leaves. So, you're trying to tell me that Sekai's best friend had an affair with Makoto, which, by the way, at this point in the anime, Sekai and Makoto are a thing, but she still states that she wants to help Sekai at all costs. What kind of best friend is she? And why did she suddenly act like this, even though all previous developments depicted a totally different character? This isn't a plot twist, this is just lazy writing. Yes, I know there's another flashback that shows that Setsuna fell in love with him at the beginning of the semester, but at this point it does not really matter. Again, because it was just a lazy reveal, and a justification to add a new girl to Makoto's harem.
Probably the only issue which was covered somewhat decently was the bullying that Kotonoha received throughout the show. She's constantly abused by her peers, spreading rumors about her due to her appearance because her bullies are jealous of her, which actually happens in real high schools. This ultimately led to a huge psychological trauma that could have been avoided, which explains her behavior during the final episodes of the show, including her dependency on Makoto and self-destructive behavior. Congratulations! However, there's always a however with this show, there are still a few problems on how it was covered. Although her behavior and reactions are mostly understandable from someone with poor self-esteem and problems with interpersonal relationships, the way that other people behave towards her can be a tad exaggerated. Kotonoha is treated like literal trash by a huge portion of the cast, with the bullies being portrayed as a redeemable evil, just like in Redo of Healer, another deep and cool show.
And if you're not convinced by everything that we already stated, we can assure you that the anime is in some deeper psychological depiction of high school students just by taking a look at the sequels of the novel. After School Days, Overflow released other novels for the franchise, such as Shiny Days and Cross Days, in order to bang more wives, explain the story. Remember Kokoro? Well, Makoto can have sex with her, and have a threesome with Kotonoha on top of that. Makoto banged his mom and impregnates her in another game. And just take a look at this adultery chart. If we take a look at, let's say, Makoto and Sekai's relationship. Yep, they are uncle and niece, and the rabbit hole goes even deeper. Of course, there can't be a discussion about School Days without talking about the ending. After all, it is one of the main arguments used to defend it. Spoilers ahead for obvious reasons. I'll give a brief summary of the ending to establish the context. At this point of the series, after the reveal that Sekai is pregnant with Makoto's child, the distancing of the other girls from him, and his reconciliation with Kotonoha. During the episode, we see an argument between our protagonists, establishing that Makoto and Kotonoha are a couple again, followed with a rather tasteful message from Makoto to Sekai insinuating to her that she should get an abortion. Yeah. Afterwards comes the most famous, or rather infamous, scene of the series. Sekai sends a text to Makoto to distract him, and proceeds to stab him repeatedly, while flashbacks of their relationship play in between. This is the moment people remember the most from the series, the one with the popular clips on YouTube and that sparked discussions. And it's not without reason. This scene contrasted quite heavily with the tone the series had been setting up since the beginning, shocking viewers with the brutal display. This moment drags on quite a bit though, taking a bit of the tension away. Afterwards, Kotonoha arrives at the apartment, with Makoto's body laying on the ground.
Sakai, having fled from the scene, is seen on her bed at night, receiving a text from Makoto, telling her to meet him on the roof. There, Kotonoha waits for her, presenting her with a duffel bag that can be assumed to contain Makoto's head, before attacking her with a handsaw, killing her on the spot. How did either of them manage to get to the roof of the school without any guard noticing is beyond me.
While this is definitely the most memorable episode of the series, it's only for its shock value, and because the 11 previous episodes weren't that interesting either. It is often argued that it's here that we see the series reach a satisfying climax, seeing our protagonist and his enabler get their just desserts after all the suffering that they've caused. And although it does provide catharsis for the aforementioned reasons, it feels superficial, almost like a cop-out to avoid developing a more well-rounded conclusion. The psychological damage that should lead to such a situation only feels plausible when looking at it from Kotonoha's perspective. It makes very little sense for Sekai to break down in such an aggressive manner when you consider how little we've seen her go through, her falling out with Makoto being the catalyst for her snapping. While I'm not saying it's impossible, it most certainly isn't the realistic take on relationships that most comments on the series would lead you to believe. Of course, I have to recognize the good points of the finale, and that starts with the bump in quality of the animation. Both murder scenes are handled in a rather much more fluid manner compared to the rest of the series, with the faces of the characters being much more expressive. Sure makes you wonder what happened early on. There are two moments of symbolism I would like to point out as well. The first one being the usage of the kettle before Sekai snaps as a parallel to the conflict reaching its boiling point. And the second one, using the roof that served as a catalyst for other points in the story as the final location where our three main characters appear together. Albeit not completely.
Now, we know what you might be thinking. Maybe the anime was a poor adaptation of its source material. And I wouldn't blame you, especially with visual novels, since, all these decisions and hours of dialogue might not translate correctly into its animated counterpart, thus hindering the quality of the final product. Well, this isn't really the case of School Days, as the source material isn't much better. Although I haven't obtained all the endings of the game because it would take an immense amount of time in a game that I didn't enjoy that much, I can more or less explain the main differences between the anime and the novel, and some of the problems as well. Overall, the game and the anime follow the same base plotline, with Kotonoha, Sekai, and Makoto, blah 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 blah, you know the story. The game also expands a bit more the supporting characters, explaining more about their background and relationships with other members of the cast, which is expected as the novel isn't constrained by the 12 episodes format. Plus, expositive dialogues are also more accepted in visual novels, so of course, there was a lot of content that was stripped out for the TV adaptation, especially considering the amount of decisions and possible routes available in the game, but more on that later. Animation-wise, the novel looks better, all things considered. Yet, School Days is an animated visual novel, so it kinda feels like you are playing an anime, a shitty one, but props on that. The TV show retained the same art style from the novel, with only a few minor differences, mostly in the color. The novel is a bit more colorful compared to the anime, but still remains that sober atmosphere, which is okay considering the tone of the story. Animations are better done on the visual novel, although there are not a lot of them aside from sex, meaning that they could actually allocate more resources and effort if they wanted. And the lip sync is awful.
How do you feel, Snake?
Well, to tell you the truth, I think I'm catching a cold.
But hey, it's a minor inconvenience for playing an anime, so we can cut it some slack. As it is a visual novel, you don't expect superb animation, if any to be honest, so it's mostly a plus despite being simple animations overall. I know that some people find it distracting, but I don't blame them. This makes us wonder, what happened with the anime, since, as we saw earlier, everything that happened in the anime was mostly simple animations, static images, and people talking. So, we wonder why it looks worse than the novel when there weren't many differences in what was actually being presented in both sources.
And now the big question is Makoto an asshole in the novel?
Yes.
He is an asshole, and he can be even worse compared to the anime. Would you believe that in one route, you witness Kotonoha being abused by Taisuke, yet Makoto decides to rope Pretzelhead right there? Real mature content here, guys. To be fair, this also depends on the decisions that you take as a player. But Makoto still behaves in ways that the player might not want to, just because he is horny. Another example was that in one of my runs, I decided to focus only on Kotonoha, avoiding any type of relationship with any other girl in the game, as well as trying to be as loyal as possible. Obviously, make your bond and love for Kotonoha stronger. The main character still has doubts about her, and even worse, he still wants to cheat on Kotonoha despite all previous actions stating otherwise. But we have to give credit where credit is due. This is one of the visual novels with the highest amount of endings and decision branches that I've ever seen so far.
But just take a look at this!
Look at this, it's huge. This gives the game a lot of replayability, and observing the interactions of each character in different routes is actually interesting. I feel gross for saying that. It's a shame this can be translated into the anime without screwing everything up, like other visual novel based animes, as we can only observe one possible scenario from a huge pool of possibilities. And also because the routes were not very good in terms of quality regardless.
Saya bilang fuck you.
So yeah, we are not talking about flawless source material from the get-go. So most of the crap that we saw in the adaptation was mostly because there was nothing to work with in the first place. Most of the cast is still dumb, the characters are one-dimensional, and they don't have solid backgrounds, neither meaningful developments for most of the story. As a final note, the development of the plot itself makes sense only when we consider that the original source material was a porn game, everyone falling for Makoto without major repercussions, aside from, dying, and every girl literally needing Makoto for effective and sexual relationships are plausible situations on such games because that's what the player wants, right?
It works in the novel because it is the expected progression from these types of games. More in those that give priority to the sex scenes rather than the story, aka School Days. Keep in mind that the School Days game has 2 hours of full motion video dedicated to banging your waifus. In perspective, that would translate to around 4 or 5 episodes from the anime's runtime. Let that sink in. That's why, for the most part, the abundance of fanservice scenes on the anime got a free pass. That didn't make me less angry though. But the idea of creating an animated series is to make this source material more accessible to other audiences. Thus, changes must be made in order to adapt the game's story and dialogues into a more streamlined and plausible product. That's why they're called adaptations.
It's a reinterpretation.
So basically, there was no realism from the start. No social commentary or anything. This is just the TV adaptation of a porn game. For the kids.
This felt like an eternity, but it's time to grade this thing. Production value. Visuals are unappealing, there's little to no color, and sometimes you feel like you are watching a PowerPoint rather than animated media. The voices are mostly decent, and the soundtrack is conspicuous by its absence. On the positive side, they retain the visuals from the novel, albeit in lower quality, and the songs were decent enough, like the one that played at the end of the series. 2 out of 5 because we have seen worse. Storytelling. There's no love quest, as Makoto and Kotonoha are a thing from the beginning. And the love triangle isn't very good either, mostly because the situations and actions are unbelievably stupid. Everything is centered around the protagonist, and if he's not on screen, the rest of the cast are either talking about him or doing something for him. The ending, while satisfactory for some people, is relevant just for the shock value. Even though infidelity and toxic relationships are not my cup of tea, they could have done something interesting with the concept, but they didn't. 1 out of 5. Characters. We're only giving this one a 2 out of 5 because there's at least one character in the entire show. Aside from Kotonoha, everyone else is unidimensional, nymphomaniac, dumb, and any other negative adjective falls here. Most of the cast have no redeemable qualities and they don't grow throughout the show, and sometimes they even contradict previously established traits, namely Setsuna and Pretzel Head. 2 out of 5 again, mainly for Kotonoha, as she is a good character, at least for school day standards I guess. Enjoyment. The experience was dull and boring, because the story barely progressed and I couldn't connect with any of the characters. Due to the tone of the show, the comedy ended up being a distraction during the second half of the show, but how? But we are all happy that the protagonist died at the end. If you want to give this show an opportunity, just remember the following. Don't! 2 out of 5.
After watching and rewatching this series more than 10 years after its release, and comparing it to other series of the same time, it's clear to us that this isn't a case of the anime aging poorly, with animation that pales in comparison to other series that came seasons earlier. The story and characters, aspects that should hold up to modern standards, are, unlike a lot of people like to say, just as bad as the rest of the production. This is not a deep or psychological anime. The issues that are portrayed are done in a way to add shock value to the series, not to make commentary on our society. Physical and psychological abuse are used as tools to move the plot along, because in the end, this is just the story of an Eroge put into 12 episodes. 12 episodes of horny characters making stupid and inhuman decisions with just a hint of characterization. The anime didn't age poorly, the anime was always shit and it was left to ferment. But hey, if you're horny, the compilation of porn scenes can be found on